Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. So finally I'm making a video. Like, this has been in works for a long time. Just watch, enjoy, and I hope you actually learn something. YouTube really helped me to learn a lot from sewing, and I hope this video will help you learn to watch, like, and please subscribe. So we are going to start with the measurements needed for the basic bodice block. I have here the shoulder measurement, the bust round, waist round, hip round, the shoulder to bust point, shoulder to under bust, shoulder to waist, shoulder to hip or shoulder to blouse length plus 1.5 inches as allowance. And I advise that if you are learning how to sew for or you're a starter, just try and get somebody that is a professional tailor or fashion designer to take your measurements so that you have an accurate record of your measurements in order to always get the best results when you're learning to sew, because that was what I did and that helps me a lot. So when you get the list of these measurements to start with, you can proceed to now design the basic bodice block. Now after that, we move on to the tools that we need. We need rollers, different kind of rollers that you can find. A tape measure, obviously. Need your scissors, pencils or marker. I'm using the marker and the pencil because I'm drawing on a sheet of paper. But if you're going to be drawing directly with your fabric, you're going to swap that out for a tailor's chalk. Now I'm going to start the bodice proper. Before I start, I'm going to draw a line at the beginning of my pattern paper, and that line is just for me to get a good grip of where I'm going to start all my measurements. So assume that that line that I've drawn there is the shoulder line, and all the measurements that you'll be taking vertically is going to start from that line. The first thing I'm going to do now is draw all the vertical measurements. I'm going to start with my bust point measurement. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm using 10 inches for my bust point, and I'm going to mark it just as you're seeing here so that I get a straight line. After marking the bust point, I'm going to mark the under bust. After the under bust, I'm going to mark the waist measurement, and after the waist measurement, I'll mark the blouse length or shoulder to hip. So just remember that all these measurements constitute your shoulder to your hip. Now I'm going to draw a straight line. After inserting all the vertical measurements, I'm going to draw a straight line, and after drawing the straight line, I'm going to label them so I know what is what as I go on to impute the horizontal measurements. All of this I'm doing is just for clarity and accuracy, because if I don't know what is what as I'm moving on, I might make some certain mistakes. And here I'm labeling the measurements so that you have an idea of what is what, also for clarity and accuracy. you are doing this for yourself, so you just make sure you do everything that is necessary for you to get the correct form of measurements and accurate bodice block when you are drawing yours. Now I haven't done the labeling of the vertical lines. As you can see, I'll move on to imputing the horizontal measurements. But before I do that, I'm adding 1.5 inches after the blouse length, which is going to serve as the allowance for finishing off that bottom part of the clothes. And also a little bit of it might go into shoulder joining. All of it is just that at the end of the day, when I do this and do that, I'm going to have my exact blouse length. Now onto the horizontal measurement. The first thing I'm going to do is measure half of my shoulder measurements, which is 16 divided by 2 is 8, and that is what I'm measuring out first. After measuring half of my shoulder measurements, I'm going to move on and measure 3 inches from the baseline. That 3 inches I'm measuring is for me to bring out the shoulder slope. The human body is not straight, it's full of curves and bends, so you have to draw your bodices to accommodate all the curves and bend. On that line that I put 8 inches, I'm going to go down by 1 inch. Now I'm going to connect from that 1 inch that I've gone down to that 3 inches, establishing the shoulder slope. Please always add shoulder slope to your dress so that you're not looking funny when you put on your bodice. Now I've done that. From that 1 inch that I went down, I'm going to measure 8 inches to impute the armhole. Now I always use 8 inches, even for somebody that has a bust of 46 inches. I'm still using 8 inches going down because I just feel like it works perfectly. Although if your bust is say less than 34, I would advise that in that place there I'm going down 8 inches, go down by 7.5. We don't actually realize this, but in sewing even 0.25 can make a lot of difference. Always make sure that you take cognizance of those little measurements. I'm just checking again to see that the 8 inches is at that bottom line there before I now draw out the armhole angle. Now after drawing the armhole angle, I'll proceed to add my other horizontal measurements from the armhole angle bottom part. My bust measurement is about 34 to 35 depending on what time of the month it is. So for there I'm going to measure quarter of what I always use and works perfectly for me. This now is going to be dependent on your own bust measurements when you're measuring. Mine is 8.75, yours might be different. After measuring that 8.75, at that point that you see there, go to the waist and measure quarter of the waist measurement. Quarter of my waist measurement is 7.5, and then you add that 7.5 there on that waist. After that, you go to your blouse length and measure quarter of your hip measurements. The bottom part of a full blouse will sit on your hip, so you need to put measurement of your hip in order for that part to be accommodated on your body. So that I'm just imputing the quarter of my hip measurements, and having imputed those points, I'm going to now join the 3 points together, and that's basically what is the starting point for my bodice. After doing all of that, now I'm going to proceed to add my dart. Remember I said that the body is not straight or angular. The body is curvy and has bends. So now you have to add a dart to it on the waist. On that waistline, I'm going to measure 4.25 inches. Now note, when you are taking the measurement, I should have added this. Please ask the professional that is helping to take your measurement to measure your nipple to nipple measurements, because that's where your dart has to be. Mine is about 7.5. Then I'm adding half an inch for when I'm going to close it, which makes it 4.25. So then I'm just measuring, as you can see, that 4.25 on the waist, on the under bust, and when I get to the line of the bust point, I'm going to come down by 2 inches. I'm coming down by 2 inches so that the dart will not take out of my bust measurement. So I'll come down by 2 inches and see the way I'm marking it there, so just so I would know where I'm going to stop. From the hip line, I'm going to also go up by 2 inches, and then when I go by 2 inches, I'll measure the 4.25 that is needed. And then I'm going to go back to that waist. On that 4.25, I'm going to measure half inch. I'll measure half inch on the right, half inch on the left of the 4.25, and then I'll now create the dart proper. So just watch, see the way I'm joining the lines. I'm going to use a ruler. I'm not shy about using a ruler when I'm sewing. It makes my lines straight. There's no shame about it, and there's no trophy for anybody that can draw straight lines with freehand. So please use your ruler if you can. Always use a ruler. See, now I'm just joining the darts like that. And for good measure, I'm going to draw a straight line across the middle of the dart, so I just know what is what. And now I'm going to add the allowance. Here I'm adding 2 inches allowance. Always make sure you add more than enough allowance. If the allowance now turns out to be too much, you can remove, but always add more than enough allowance. Here I'm adding 2 inches on where I impute the bust, quarter of the bust measurements. On the waist, I'm going to add 3 inches because I'm using half of it for the dart. Now if somebody's waist measurement is, say, more than like 30 to 33, 34 inches, you can use 0.75, and then you know that you're going to be adding 1.25 plus 2 inches allowance on the waist measurement. So now I'm going to put the armhole. I'm going to zoom in my camera so you can see now where that angular line is. I'm going to look for the middle point, or the midpoint rather. Since this is 8, I know that my midpoint is 4. On that 4 inches, I'm going to come in by 0.25 or half an inch. I think I came in by half an inch here, half an inch, and I'm just going to use my free hand to just curve it out. If you have a French curve or something that can help you to properly draw the curve, definitely use it, but free hand too. And my hand is not very straight, so you can see that I'm using dotted lines, and then I can now straighten it after I've gotten what I desire. On the neckline area, I'm going to come down by 3 inches from the 3 inches on the shoulder line. I'll come down by another 3 inches, and down I'll measure another angle as you see me do, and then just curve out the neckline. Depending on what you are making, the neckline can go lower but you can't go higher. You cannot use anything less than 3 inches for your neckline, especially for the front, so that the clothes is not looking funny. Now let's move on to the back block. What we did there was the front bodice. Now let's move on to the back bodice block. First thing I'm doing before I start is measuring 2 inches. It is from these 2 inches that I'm measuring that I'm going to impute my zip allowance. I don't use the entire 2 inches for zip allowance. I just put the 2 inches there so that I know that I have more than enough room for when I want to put my zip allowance. Now I'm drawing a straight line on that place I put 2 inches, and every measurement that I'll be taking now is going to start from that line that I'm drawing there. And then don't forget your baseline. Always leave room for the base. Always leave room for the base, just so that you have space to go back and forth. That's what I'm doing there. And after labeling where the zip allowance is, I added my base, because that's very, very important. And then from there, I'm going to measure my vertical measurements just as I did for the front part. I'm going to measure 10 inches for the bust point, 13 inches for the under bust, 16 inches for the waist, 24 inches for the blouse length. And then the straight line, like I said, for clarity and accuracy, so that I know where I'm putting my stuff. Yeah, I'm sitting down to draw this. Sorry, I needed fun because this work is kind of tasking when you are doing it for illustration. Now from that line there, I'm measuring half of my shoulder measurements, and then I'm measuring 3 inches from the same line so I can create my shoulder slope as explained in the front bodice parts. Okay, and you can see that my paper has been joined somewhere there, because I just wanted to get the full length of my blouse without any issue. So then from that line, I come down by 8 inches, just like I did at the front. Definitely checking to see that everything is accurate. So draw the angle for the armhole. After drawing the angle for the armhole, I can now proceed with my measurements, horizontal measurements, quarter of my bust measurements. So I'm labeling again so that everybody can see what I'm doing, and it's clarity. Clarity is important when you're sewing. If you don't know what you're doing, you might as well just go and give somebody to make a clothes for you. Blouse length. And I'm drawing out the line properly, just so that everything is where it's supposed to be. Now, quarter of my bust measurements, quarter of my waist measurements, quarter of my hip measurement, and then I remember that I haven't added the 1.5 allowance for finishing off the bottom part of the blouse. So I'm adding it, and also make sure that I put quarter of the hip measurement there after drawing a straight line for illustration. just drawing lines for you to see what I'm doing properly. Please, when I go silent, just know that I'm trying to organize my thoughts. Yeah. And you can see that I recheck the measurement before I draw the line to avoid stories that touch. Always check and recheck. It's your clothes. There's no rush. Take your time. And of course, even though I have, after drawing these things, I have some angles there. When I'm cutting now, I'll make sure that I'm not cutting to the angle. I'm cutting straight. Now, using the method I mentioned for putting the dart, I'm going to put the illustration for where the dart is going to be. And here, you know that I went down by 2 inches on the bust point. Here I'm drawing the beginning of the dart is from the bust point, but it's still going up by 2 inches from the blouse length. So the beginning of the dart is from the bust point, and the end is 2 inches above the blouse length. So here I'm just drawing a straight line, connecting those first, and then I'll now draw the angles that illustrate my darts. Really, drawing the bodice is very simple. Like, just follow my instruction play by play and you get it. And I definitely advise you use a paper before you use clothes if you're a beginner. Now I'm adding 2 inches allowance, 3 inches, because on the 2 inches on the bust part, 3 inches on the waist part, because I'm going to take 1 inch out of that for that, and then I'm joining. And when you are doing things like this, just know that perfection is for God. So do you and leave perfection for God. But at least make sure that you do the needed. Now here on the armhole area, I'm not going to go in or come out or anything like I did for the front part. I'm just going to draw a slight curve like that. And in case you didn't know, for somebody like me, I learned how to sew with freehand. So most of the things that I do might not be like practical or theoretically accurate for somebody that is learning with pattern making. But this, what I'm showing here, works for me, and that's what I'm showing. So from that place, I'm going to come down by 1.5 inch, and then all of that is just for me to angle out my neckline. Always make sure that you use 3 inches for the width of a neckline for an adult. Even for children safe of a certain age, you use 3 inches for the width of their neckline. So now from that neckline point, I'm going to measure 1 inch from that place. What I'm doing here now is trying to draw out the zip allowance. I don't like to use too much cloth for zip allowance. I just don't like it, so bear with me. On the waist point, I'm going to measure 0.75, not 1 inch. 0.75, because the waist curves in before it goes out again towards the butt. So you have to accommodate that curving, and if you use a straight line from the neckline to the waist and down, you are going to have a bulge. But to avoid the bulge, just go in by 0.25 from whatever you have at the neckline. Here I have one at the neckline, so on the waistline I went in by 0.25, and then I have my new zip allowance. So I'm just going to remove the tape that I used to hold it down and try and cut this one out. I didn't show the part I was cutting out the front bodice, but I'm still going to bring it back here. Now just see how I'm carefully cutting it out. And this is on that shoulder line. I have not cut out the neckline and the shoulder slope. That is because I like to bring front and back of of bodices together to cut the neckline and the shoulder slope, so that what I have will be the exact same thing. As much as we are cutting this differently, we still want it to have a level of similarity in order for it to fit together like a perfect puzzle piece. So that's why I've not cut out the shoulder slope or the neckline. So after trimming off that place, I'm going to bring or reintroduce the front to the back after I've cut out my back bodice. Just introduce them and then make the final adjustments. And please trim yours very well. I didn't trim some of my own this thing very well. Make sure you trim yours well. So I'm just aligning what should be where there. Can you just see? I'm aligning it so that I'll be able to now trim both of it together. There's no science to this. Just bring the front to the back, and you know where the zip allowance is because you've drawn out the line for it, and then separate accordingly. Just using a masking tape so that as I'm trimming out the shoulder slope and the back armhole, I will not have shifts. So just cutting out the shoulder slope, cutting out the neckline, and then I'll cut out the shoulder. See how I'm cutting out that shoulder part. The front, the armhole at the front is different from the armhole at the back. Note, that's just the way it is. So you can see where that marker line is. That's where the front is, but the back is not that way. And then I'm cutting out the neckline. I'm just used to this way of cutting out the neckline because that's how my yoga taught me. When you align both parts, cut out the shorter neckline together, then separate and cut out the